I still remember the day Claire stepped into my life like a quiet storm. I was 22, stubborn, full of unresolved grief, and just a little too angry at the world. My mom had died 6 years earlier, and my dad, Deadward Carrington, had changed after that. He buried himself in work, barely looked up from his phone during dinners, and only spoke to me when it was about college or expectations. He built walls around himself that I couldn't break, and in return, I built mine. Then, one afternoon in late October, he told me he was getting remarried to a woman I had never even heard of. "Her name is Claire," he said simply, "and she's moving in next week." Just like that. So no warning, no explanation. He didn't ask how I felt. He just assumed I'd accept it, like everything else. Claire Donovan. The name sounded delicate, but the woman herself had presence. She was beautiful in a way that didn't try too hard, tall, slim, with soft hazel eyes that always seemed to be searching for something. She was from Chicago, with a soft Midwest accent and a wardrobe that said class without being loud. I hated her on sight, not because she did anything wrong, but because she wasn't my mother. And she was taking up space in a house that still smelled like memories. The first week she moved in, she tried to talk to me. She asked about my classes at Boo, offered to make me breakfast, even left a note with my coffee cup that read, "Hope today feels a little lighter." I didn't say, "Thank you." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her like she didn't belong, but she never pushed. That was the strange part. Claire didn't try to become a mother. She didn't hover or demand respect. She just existed quietly, like she knew her presence alone was too much for me. And somehow that made it worse. I started noticing things. How? She always had a book in her hand, how she hummed while cooking, how she stood on the back porch every evening with a glass of white wine, staring out like the trees had something to tell her. There was a loneliness in her that mirrored my own, and it unsettled me more than I was willing to admit. One night I came home drunk from a party. I didn't even remember who I was with, just that everything felt meaningless. I slammed the door, ready to stumble into my room, when I saw her sitting alone in the kitchen, her head resting against the counter. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the stove light. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She just sat there with her knees pulled up, face pale, tears silently running down her cheeks. I froze. For the first time, I didn't see her as the intruder or the replacement. I saw her as a woman, a real one, fragile and hurting, and so quietly sad that it made my chest tighten. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, though I wasn't sure why. She didn't answer. Just wiped her face and nodded like she was too tired to pretend. I walked over, pulled a chair, and sat beside her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. After a long moment, she said, "I never wanted to be anyone's second choice. But sometimes life doesn't ask what we want." Her voice cracked a little. She didn't look at me, but I looked at her. Ellie looked. Her bare feet were cold against the tile, her sweater too thin for the chilly night, her hair pulled up carelessly like she hadn't thought to make herself pretty. And yet, she was beautiful. Not in the glamorous magazine kind of way, but in the kind of way that made you want to know what she was thinking at 3 a.m. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. That night, something changed between us. We didn't speak again until the next morning, but I noticed how her eyes lingered on me a little longer. How her smile became softer, like she wasn't just being polite anymore. I told myself it was just sympathy, that I was imagining it. But deep down, I knew better. There was something in the way she looked at me, like she was trying not to feel something dangerous, something real. From that night on, our dynamics shifted. I still pretended not to care, still rolled my eyes when she asked if I wanted dinner. But I also stayed in the room longer, listened when she spoke, the way her lips moved when she read from her book. I hated how aware I became of her, how her scent lingered in the hallway, how the sound of her laugh made my skin warm. She wasn't my stepmother in the way people imagined. She wasn't maternal or controlling. She was a woman married to my father. And yet, somehow, it felt like we were both in the wrong story, trapped in a life we didn't choose. Looking back, I think the most dangerous kind of love is the one that sneaks up on you when you're too broken to defend yourself. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, it just happens. And that's exactly what was happening with Claire. Even if neither of us said it out loud, not yet. Asterisk, it started with quiet nights. It's the kind where the house felt too big, too silent, like even the walls were holding their breath. My father was traveling more, flying back and forth between Boston and Toronto for work. Claire stayed behind like she always did, surrounded by cold rooms and unfinished thoughts. I was still living at home, still figuring out life after college, still lost in my own head. The nights stretched longer, and the distance between us grew shorter. We didn't plan. It did just happen. It was a Thursday night in late November when I found her sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, legs tucked up, glass of wine in hand. The air was crisp. You could smell the firewood from a neighbor's chimney. I stepped outside, unsure. Why? And she looked up with tired eyes and said, "Can't sleep." I shook my head and sat down next to her. No words were needed after that. We just sat, breathing in the quiet. It became a habit. Every few nights we'd find each other there. At first, we just talked about safe things, music, books, the weather, but slowly the conversations deepened. She told me things I don't think she ever said out loud before. Like how she once dreamed of being a photographer. How her first husband was violent and charming in equal parts. How she thought. She had escaped all that when she married my father, but somehow ended up feeling invisible again. "Your dad's not cruel," she told me one night, staring into the dark. "He just doesn't really." See me? I didn't know what to say, but I understood more than she realized, 'cause I knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people and still feel like no one truly knew you. And then there was the night everything changed. It had been raining, a soft, steady drizzle that made the world feel slower. I joined her on the porch, like always. She was barefoot, her legs curled under her, wearing one of my father's oversized sweaters. We were talking about nothing and everything. I told her about a recurring dream I had where I was running through a house full of doors, but none of them led anywhere. She looked at me for a long moment and said softly, "Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're just stuck somewhere you don't belong." The way she said it felt like she was talking about herself, too. The air shifted. I looked at her and she looked back, and in that space between a breath and a blink, we crossed a line. I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a quiet collision of two people starving for something real. Her lips were warm and hesitant, but she didn't pull away. My hands trembled as I touched her face, half expecting her to stop me. But she didn't. The kiss deepened slow, aching, like it had been waiting to happen for far too long. When we finally pulled apart, she whispered, "This can't happen." And yet, her fingers didn't let go of mine. The next morning, we pretended nothing happened. We avoided eye contact, stuck to safe topics, and danced around the truth like it was too fragile to touch. But the silence between us was louder than ever. The next time it happened, it wasn't an accident. I found her in the kitchen late at night, still awake, and before I could think, I pulled her into me. She didn't resist. This time it was need. This time it was fire. The kind that scorches the edges of your soul but makes you feel alive. Again, we didn't talk about labels. We didn't use the word affair. But that's what it was. A secret wrapped in guilt and laced with desire. I knew it was wrong. I knew it could destroy everything, but I couldn't stop. And neither could she. During the day, we were strangers passing in a house full of lies. At night, we were lovers, tangled in sheets and shame, trying to breathe in a world that would never understand us. There was something about Claire that made everything else fade. She listened when I spoke, not just with her ears, but with her whole heart. She made me feel seen, really seen, for the first time in years. I wanted to believe that what we had was more than lust. Okay? That maybe, just maybe, it was the kind of love that didn't follow the rules. But love isn't clean. It's messy. It's complicated. It demands things from you, sacrifices, secrets, and slowly. It started to weigh on us. One night she sat at the edge of my bed, her back to me, and whispered, "Do you ever wonder how this ends?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew. Nothing this beautiful land, this forbidden sever, ends without breaking something. Still, I couldn't walk away. And neither could she. We were playing with fire, and neither of us cared if we got burned. We weren't just crossing lines anymore. We were living on the other side of them. Claire and I had slipped so far into each other's orbit, we stopped trying to fight the gravity. What started as quiet touches and midnight kisses had turned in 2 full nights spent in each other's arms, whispering things we should never have said, craving things we never thought we'd feel. It was passion, yes, but it was more than just bodies tangled in the dark. It was emotional, deep, the kind of connection that made the world feel like it finally made sense for a moment. She started to memorize my sleep patterns. I learned how she liked her tea. We shared inside jokes, unfinished thoughts, and long silences that didn't feel awkward at all. The space between us was so intimate, it scared me. Because no matter how good it felt, we were building something dangerous on the bones of someone else's life, my father's life. And he had no clue. He was so wrapped up in his work, his newest merger, his cross-border meetings in Toronto, his obsession with status and wealth, that he didn't notice what was happening right under his roof. Claire played the part well. Too well at dinner. She smiled when he spoke, nodded politely when he went on about business deals I couldn't care less about. But I noticed the way her eyes would find mine across the table, just for a second. A glance full of heat, guilt, and something much worse, need. I couldn't take it. The pretending, the hiding, the aching. We were acting like criminals in our own home, stealing moments like they were oxygen. Always afraid someone would catch us breathing. The tension became unbearable. We'd make promises to stop, swear we wouldn't touch again, that this was the last time. But the truth was, neither of us meant it. Every time we pulled away, we fell back harder. The more we tried to stop, the deeper we sank. Claire once whispered against my neck, "This isn't love. This is self-destruction." But her body told a different story. She wanted me. I wanted her, and it was ruining both of us. Then, one night, my father sat me down. It was rare he barely spoke to me, unless it was about responsibility or appearances. But that night, his voice was calm, almost excited. "Claire and I are thinking of having a baby," he said, without even looking up from his glass of scotch. I felt the room tilt. My stomach turned, and I stared at him like he'd just spoken in another language. A baby, with Claire, the woman I had kissed 100 times, the woman whose breath I memorized, whose body had pressed into mine like we were 2 halves of a puzzle. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. All I could do was walk out and try not to fall apart on the front lawn. That night, I told Claire. She already knew. He'd mentioned it to her earlier that week. But when I said the words out loud, "He wants a baby," her eyes filled with something close to panic. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "I never wanted to be a mother again." I knew she had miscarried years ago, with her first husband, a pain she carried quietly. I held her that night as she cried. And in the dark, I asked the question that had been living in my chest for weeks. Leave him, be with me, for real. Her silence was louder than a scream. She didn't say no, but she didn't say yes. I started seeing the cracks in her, the fear, the hesitation. It's the way she clung to the life she had, even though it was built on convenience and comfort, not love. "He gave me safety," she said once, "but you make me feel alive, and I don't know which one I'm supposed to choose." I wanted to hate her for that, but I couldn't, because part of me understood. Love like ours came with a cost, and she wasn't sure she could afford to pay it. We started to drift, not completely, but just enough to feel the space. Her touches grew shorter, her goodbyes less sweet. She'd disappear into her room early and close the door. And still, I couldn't stop wanting her. Every part of me craved her like a drug. The warmth of her skin, the smell of her shampoo on my sheets, the way she whispered my name when she thought no one could hear. I was addicted to her, to us, and every day we stayed apart. The ache in my chest grew louder. I began to hate the house, the walls that had seen too much, the floorboards that remembered too well. I started spending nights out just to escape it. But no matter where I went, I always found my way back, because she was there. And part of me hoped, maybe prayed that one night she'd open her door and choose me, fully, without fear. But deep down I was starting to realize love isn't always enough. Sometimes love shows up too late, or too wrong, or too complicated to survive the real world. And even though we never stopped wanting each other, the weight of that want was crushing us both. And yet I'd do it all again, for one more night of her skin against mine. Asterisk, the winter came early that year, covering Boston in a cold silence that matched the one growing inside our house. Claire and I hadn't touched in weeks, but the space between us still pulsed with everything unsaid. We were both walking through our days like ghosts, wearing masks, pretending we didn't remember how it felt to hold each other at night. My father was more present now, working from home more often, checking in. As if some small part of him sensed the distance that had crept into his marriage. Claire played the part, perfectly gentle smiles, warm dinners, polite laughter. But her eyes never softened anymore. They just stayed tired. And when she thought no one was looking, she would stand by the window for long minutes, lost in thought, as if waiting for someone who would never come. One night, I found her there barefoot in the kitchen, staring out into the snow-covered yard. She didn't hear me at first. I watched her, remembering how she used to lean into my touch, how she'd whisper my name like it was a secret only we shared. I stepped forward, barely speaking. "Claire." She turned slowly, and for the first time in weeks, our eyes locked. No pretense, no defense, just raw, quiet pain between us. "I can't breathe without you," I said. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even planned. It just fell out of me, honest, desperate. She looked away, biting her lip, and whispered, "I know. But we can't keep pretending this doesn't destroy people." Her voice cracked. "This isn't a love story. It's a storm. But love doesn't care about logic, or consequences, or damage. It just is." And that night, we gave in again. One last time, or so we told ourselves. We moved like two people who knew every curve, every scar, every breath. It wasn't just sex, it was heartbreak and hunger and memory all tangled together. When it was over, we didn't speak. I just lay beside her, my hand resting on the bare skin of her back, wishing time would freeze. But morning came, and with it, the weight of what we were doing crushed us all over again. The next few days were worse. Claire barely looked at me. I started packing for an apartment I hadn't even signed the lease for yet. My dad kept talking about house renovations and Claire's birthday plans, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his home was already cracking. I think that's what hurt the most, how blind he was. Not just to us, but to her. He had no idea who she really was. He never saw her pain, never heard the things she didn't say. He was too busy loving the version of her he had created in his head. And maybe that's why she fell into me in the first place, because I saw her. Really saw her. Then the secret came crashing down. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was out getting coffee when I got the call. Claire, her voice was shaking. "You need to come home." Now, when I walked in, my father was sitting at the dining table, his face pale, eyes dark. The look he gave me, like I was a stranger, cut deeper than any slap. Claire was standing near the stairs, hands shaking, her face frozen in fear. And then he spoke, voice low and broken. "How long has this been going on?" The silence screamed. I couldn't lie. I didn't even try. I just stood there, watching the man who raised me fall apart. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. That would have been easier. He just stared at me, like something inside him had died. Claire tried to speak, tried to explain, but he held up his hand and walked away. That night, he packed a bag and left. Just like that. No drama, no goodbye. Just silence and a door closing behind him. The fallout was worse than I imagined. Claire didn't cry. She just moved through the house like she was underwater. I stayed for a few more days, then left too. The air in that place had become poison. We didn't speak for weeks. I moved into my new apartment in Cambridge, tried to focus on work, tried to numb the guilt. But every night, I'd lie awake replaying it, all her breath on my skin. The way she used to say my name when the world was quiet, the sound of that door closing for the last time. Then, one rainy evening, I heard a knock. I opened the door and there she was. Claire, drenched, exhausted, eyes red from crying. She didn't say a word. Just stepped inside, wrapped her arms around me, and held on like she was drowning. We stood there, soaked and silent, and I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until then. She had chosen me. Maybe too late, maybe at the cost of everything, but still. She had chosen me, and in that moment I didn't care about the mess, the betrayal, the shame. All I cared about was the woman in my arms and the way she finally let herself fall into me. Claire stayed with me after that night. At first it felt like we were hiding again, but this time from the broken world we had created. She moved into my small apartment in Cambridge, bringing only a suitcase and a heart full of scars. Everything was different now. There was no more sneaking around, no more holding our breath every time the floor creaked. But even with the freedom, the air between us was heavy. The truth had cost us everything: my father's trust, our family, and the life she had built for years. We were finally together, but the wreckage still burned behind us, and we couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I remember waking up beside her in those first mornings, watching her sleep with a kind of awe and guilt that twisted in my chest. Her face looked softer without the weight of secrets. But there was still something haunted in her eyes when she opened them, like she was waiting for the world to punish her for choosing love over loyalty. We tried to make it feel normal. We cooked breakfast together, read on the couch, walked through quiet streets where no one knew who we were. She'd rest her head on my shoulder while we watched old movies, and for a while it almost felt like we could have a real life. But the past had a way of creeping in. I'd catch her staring at her phone, checking for messages from my father that never came. I knew she was hurting, but she wouldn't say it out loud. I didn't ask because part of me didn't want to hear the answer. We loved each other. Yes, but that didn't erase the damage. We were living proof that love could be beautiful and brutal all at once. One night, we sat on the floor of the living room with a bottle of wine between us. The lights were low and the city outside felt far away. Claire looked at me. Really? Looked at me and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're just running from something?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her this was real, that everything we felt mattered. But I also knew she was right. We were running away from guilt, from judgment, from the shame that clung to our story. "Maybe we are," I said quietly, "but I'd rather run with you than stand still without you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she kissed me like it was the last time, slow and aching. Like she was trying to memorize the shape of my soul. There were good days, too. Days when we laughed so hard we forgot how complicated everything was. We took a weekend trip to Cape Cod, stayed in a cheap motel near the water, and spent the entire time wrapped up in each other. She wore an oversized hoodie and no makeup, and I had never seen her more beautiful. We walked the shoreline at sunset, and she said, "This feels like a different world, like we could be anyone here." I told her we didn't need a new world, we just needed a new beginning. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The truth was, we both knew the outside world would never understand us. To them, Claire would always be the woman who slept with her stepson. And I'd always be the guy who betrayed his father. But behind closed doors, we weren't those people. We were just two broken hearts that had found each other in the middle of a storm. And even though it didn't make sense to anyone else, it made sense to us. That had to be enough, didn't it? Then came the letter. It was in the mailbox one cold March morning. A handwritten envelope, no return address, just my name on the front. Inside was a single piece of paper, my father's handwriting. He wrote that he didn't hate me, but he had seen it coming in some way long before it happened. That Claire had been drifting away from him for years, and maybe he had been too proud to see it. But he also wrote that forgiveness wouldn't come easy. That love, when it's taken instead of earned, leaves scars that never fully heal. I read it aloud to Claire, and she cried in a way I'd never seen before. Not from sadness, but from release, like the weight she'd been carrying had finally cracked open. That night, she looked at me and said, "I still don't know if we did the right thing. But I know I'd still choose you." And I believed her. We weren't perfect. Far from it. We were messy and complicated and made of mistakes, but we were real. And in a world full of fake smiles and quiet regrets, real felt like a kind of salvation. We didn't know what the future looked like. Maybe we'd make it. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in months, we weren't just surviving. We were living. And that was something worth holding on to. Asterisk spring crept in slowly that year, like the world was still unsure if we deserved another chance at warmth. Claire and I had settled into something that looked like peace, quiet mornings, late night, talks and moments of stillness where we'd just lie together, not needing to say a word. On the surface, things were calm, but underneath, there were cracks. Neither of us wanted to admit we're growing wider. We had built a life together out of love, yes, but also out of pain, guilt, and stolen time. And as much as we tried to ignore it, the weight of our past kept following us, like a shadow that stretched longer the more we tried to run from it. I could see it in Claire's eyes, in the way she smiled less often, in the way she touched me, like she was afraid I might vanish. She was still with me, but part of her had drifted somewhere I couldn't reach. And maybe I had to. One evening, we sat on the rooftop of our building, watching the sun melt behind the skyline. Claire was wrapped in a blanket, her hair tucked behind one ear, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked older than she had just a year ago, not in a bad way, just different. Like life had carved something deep into her, and she had finally stopped fighting it. "I dreamed about him last night," she said quietly. I didn't need to ask who she meant. My father, the man whose name still made my stomach tighten. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, like he was waiting for something. I swallowed hard and nodded, unsure what to say. We never talked about him much anymore, but he was always there. In the silence, in the space between us, Claire turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I don't think I can keep living like this, Mason. Hiding, wondering, carrying this weight every day. I love you, but I don't know if love is enough anymore." Her voice cracked, and in that moment I felt the floor shift beneath my heart. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that what we had could still be saved. But a part of me, maybe the grown-up part, knew she wasn't wrong at all. We had built our love on broken ground, and no matter how much we tried to patch it, the cracks kept coming back. We were tired, worn down, not from a lack of love, but from too much of it with nowhere safe to put it. The next day she packed a bag, not everything, just a few essentials. She said she needed space, not because she didn't love me, but because she needed to find herself again outside of the mess we had created. "I lost who I was in all of this," she said, her voice soft but steady, "and I think you did too." I watched her go, not stopping her, because deep down I understood. Love sometimes means letting go, even when everything in you wants to hold on. The door closed behind her, quiet and final. Days turned into weeks. I didn't hear from her. I didn't reach out either. I focused on work, spent time alone, tried to rebuild parts of myself I had let fall apart when I wrapped my life around hers. I started therapy. I went on long walks. I even called my father once, not to apologize, but just to talk. We didn't say much, but it was a start. The silence between us wasn't filled with anger anymore, just a quiet, shared understanding that some wounds take time to close and some never really do. Then, one afternoon in late June, I found a letter on my doorstep. It was from Claire, her handwriting familiar and shaky. She wrote that she was in Vermont, staying with her sister, and learning how to be still again. She said she missed me every day, but she had found peace in her own space. "You were my storm, Mason," she wrote, "but you were also my shelter. And for that, I will always love you." At the end of the letter, she wrote one last thing. Maybe our story isn't over. Maybe we just needed to put down the pen for a while. I sat on my floor holding that letter for what felt like hours, letting every word sink into me like sunlight after a long winter. And maybe that's what love really is. Not perfect. It's not always forever, but real. Messy, honest, heartbreaking, beautiful. The kind of love that teaches you, shapes you, and sometimes leaves you so you can grow. Claire and I didn't promise each other a fairy tale ending. We had already lived the fire and fallout of forbidden love. But we had also lived the beauty of it, the kind of beauty that doesn't fade. Even when the chapter ends, I still think about her. I still feel her. Some nights I dream she's lying beside me again, her breath warm against my neck, her hand tucked under mine. And I smile, not with sadness, but with gratitude, because some loves don't need a perfect ending. Some loves are unforgettable simply because they happened. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.